we need to talk about the GAA. The GPA came out yesterday and issued a letter to all of the Special Congress attendees. They said that they had attempted to explain their position in a call, but had been asked not to lobby on the management call recently, and that's why they've gone with the course of action that they've gone. They've backed up Conor Donoghue's figures, saying that they believe those figures to be true, and that there's actually a potential 10 million windfall for the GAA nationally. 2 million of that would go to the provincial councils. I think it was really interesting listening to Michael Duignan yesterday saying the provincial councils are really important, and on a day-to-day level they are the body that is essentially the local government for the county boards. They're the administrative support, that's the HR function, the finance function, all that kind of stuff, and actually that makes loads of sense. The GAA should have these devolved power structures that doesn't mean that everybody has to go to Croke Park to get everything rubber stamped, and that money can flow two ways. It seems like all of the architecture is there to actually deliver on the football championship, but there are a few more people coming out saying different things about Plan B. What's in the papers today?
Well, we got Niall Carew in the papers today. I might just grab the Irish Independent off you. It's interesting, and this seems to have been, I guess, a bit of a theme over the last couple of days. I think that maybe there's been this acceptance that if you judge Proposal B versus the status quo in isolation, it's very, very hard to make a case for the status quo. It's very, very hard to make any sort of case against Proposal B. Just to kind of recap, we had Brian McAvoy on the show last week, and there were a couple of different issues that he raised. The first was the disconnect that will now exist between the provincial championship and the All-Ireland championship. The second thing was financial, and that seemed to be a big bugbear of his. And he also mentioned dead rubbers as a possible reason why a league-based championship just wouldn't work, that he would much more value the straight knockout sort of thing, or one with a back door. Niall Morgan has said that the disconnect between the provincial championship and the All-Ireland championship is not an issue, so that's one of them. The financial aspect, we had Conor O'Donoghue on the show yesterday, who said there will be €10 million more. That's being modest, and that includes both centrally and provincially funding over the next little while if you take Proposal B in a one-year scenario. And then finally, was the dead rubbers, as we've mentioned before. There would be a tiny fraction of dead rubbers. There have been a tiny fraction of dead rubbers when you get to the latter stages of the National League, and that's what you judge this on. So it seems that the argument has moved from that to a wider view of the GAA. Niall Carew, the Carlow boss, says small counties need money, not restructure. That's the headline on the Irish Independent piece today, and he's making the point that it's the financial assistance that the counties need, not a new structure. And you do wonder why these two things are mutually exclusive. And we're going to have Cahir O'Kane on the evening show tonight. He's going to be chatting to Nathan, and he's been making the point that as well the smaller counties are not necessarily going to stand to benefit from this whatsoever. Now, his point is not to do with finance. His point is to do with I would suggest exposure, and the fact that actually once you have a top tier, those top teams playing each other more regularly is going to ring fence that a little bit more when it comes to standards and driving things on. When it comes back to Carew, then he says the powers that be will always just say it's not just money. My answer would be that it is money, because the budget we in the smaller counties have to prepare our teams doesn't go close to the top teams. You're going to expose your under-20s to the very same way of doing things, your under-17s, and then when they get to senior level, they're in the right physical condition and all of that. But what's happening with the smaller teams is the money is not going into the 17s. They're not exposed to the same SNC as the top teams, and that's the problem. So we can go with our A, B, C and D proposals all we want, but what you are doing is kicking the can down the road.
I have a lot of sympathy for what he's saying. The one caveat I would have is that, again, it's a fairly similar argument to the football. Let's push the limits to see where it is. Let's see what football is like in those counties that are the so-called weaker counties, of which Carlow is one. Let's see what it's like when all of your best players decide they want to stay and play in the championship, because there is a meaningful outcome at the end of that championship. You could be promoted, you could win that division. And I think what we need to do is say that there will be big celebrations. There will be all-stars from the four divisions who will all automatically be nominated for the overall all-stars. I think that there's ways that we can incentivise those counties to really give it absolutely everything. 7 games in high summer, training on the same amount of time as all the other counties training on. Let's see what quality of football those counties produce. I keep hearing that this won't benefit the smaller counties, but to go back to Tony McEntee at the very start of our conversations about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, when he was talking to players in Sligo, and asking them to sign up for the year and to commit to being inter-county footballers for Sligo, he was being asked, why, Tony? Why would I? Look at what I'm going to end up. I'm going to slog my way through the winter, slog my way through the league, and then I'm going to be humiliated on national TV in the provincial championships against a Mayo team who have a decade and a half of significant investment in strength and conditioning and development squads and all that kind of stuff. But what if all the best Sligo players committed and over an 18-month period played together, trained together, did the strength and conditioning, used the nutrition? Is there a possibility they could get to Division 2 and actually contend? And by winning Division 3, they would have an All-Ireland quarter-final on the back of 6 wins to get there, or 7 wins if they won every game. And suddenly they have a home round of last 16 in Markievicz Park against a team from Division 4 for the right to play in Croker in an All-Ireland quarter-final on a day of double headers. Would that not be something that they would all go, yeah, I can get behind that? As we watch week in, week out, points kicked from both touchlines because everybody in the crowd has their phone out and that goes mad on social. I think that's a possibility. And I think for Carlow, I totally understand that their budget is miles and miles and miles behind what it needs to be. But what we would be able to do is say at the end of a season, the first season go, Carlow had 84 training sessions. They had access to a full-time strength and conditioning coach only for 44 of those because that's all they could afford to pay. And at that point, I believe in the extra money. I genuinely believe that there will be extra money. Then you start going, okay, the Leinster Council have employed a strength and conditioning coach who's going to supplement the work that the counties are doing. And you begin to go, where are the gaps in the funding? And you can equalise that funding at that point because there's a meaningful championship and everybody knows at the start of the season we're going to have these round robin games in our provincial championship and we're going to have these league games, and that's it. The season's over at that point, right? Then you go back to your clubs and that's a much easier way of quantifying what the requirements are, what the expenses are, and what the gap in funding is. I think there's no science to the gap at the moment. Dublin have whatever they have, Mayo have whatever they have, and the figures that Colm Keys gathers every year, I don't know if they're all published from the individual county boards, but at some point you can begin to put science around that and audit around that and say, okay, these counties are only allowed to spend a certain amount of money, and you cap that spending and you equalise it, and if anybody's spending over, there's a punishment. There's actually fairly easy templates for this from other sports around the world where you can find out what needs to be spent and equalise it, but you can't do it at the moment in the chaos that there is. And also, how are you going to convince the best Carlow footballers if you do get drawn against the Dubs? Oh yeah, I want to crack against the Dubs, or maybe people do want that one-off game and they're happy with that, and I'm completely wrong. I don't know. It doesn't feel like that way though.
No, I think when it comes to the structure, I think the vast majority of people are in agreement that the status quo just doesn't work whatsoever. This is the conversation that does have a lot of, that does hold water, I think, and I'm not sure should it necessarily impact the structural decision, but maybe it should. Like, just one person who got in touch with us yesterday on Twitter, Kevin Egan, he said any chance you could tackle the financial disparity issue, which seems to be ignored already. The gap between the AIG/Sports Direct/Kerry Group financial packages and the rest is a problem. Now under proposal B, the top teams will have even more exposure and the rest will have less. And I wonder if actually that is a real concern amongst people, that maybe if the organisation has stood still for so long on so many things, that when they get given a good proposal like this and it passes in that hypothetical situation next week, will they actually make the most of it? Will they ensure that the lower divisions actually do get the exposure that they should get? Do they have the creativity required in order to actually make this thing work? And I would say to that, I'm seeing this as quite maybe a little bit too black and white, but I really do see it as status quo versus proposal B. And I just think, where's the exposure for the teams that don't get any games after their first 2 in the year? Maybe 3 games if they're lucky. They're just completely wiped off the face of the planet.
So what you're saying is that the problem that people are pointing out with Plan B exists already. That problem already exists
in a worse way than it would exist in Plan B.
And there's nothing on the table to even pretend to address it. Like, so you've diagnosed a problem that currently exists, and we don't know that the same problem is going to exist in the future if we go with the new proposal. Like, maybe what we could do is, if those counties are making all that money, we could take some of the money off them and redistribute it. Like, it's an equalisation, a very easy thing to do, to equalise that, so that Division 3 and Division 4 counties automatically get a share of the revenue generated from the other counties. Because now we have a very defined season where you're playing inter-county here and you're playing club here, and you're not allowed to spend any money on the inter-county team after August or whenever it is until the following January. There's your budget, and everybody maybe has the same budget. Maybe you can do that now because the split season exists. Yes, you need some radical thinking, and yes, there need to be new iterations and new wrinkles, and the finance committee needs to go off and look at that problem. But if you build this championship, then all of a sudden everybody has exactly the same number of games, apart from the teams who make the quarterfinal, semi-final and final. And even then, if you keep the Tailteann Cup, almost everybody's going to have the exact same number of games and the same opportunity to improve. This whole notion about, if you ring fence those top teams, they'll play against each other, and that's the only way to improve, is to play against teams who are better than you. The only way to improve is to invest in coaching and strength and conditioning and make sure that your club season is thriving. And at that point, because the sport is a fairly straightforward sport, the evolution of coaching in each of these counties is going to wash through the system. And I actually can't see any long-term negative from this.
Can I just ask one question? And I'm not entirely sure of the answer to this, so it is genuinely a question. What is more expensive to a county? Is it running long-term training camps, or is it match days?
Well, you make money on match days.
Well, that's it, and the net gain is there. Like, I genuinely think that and again, I'm posing this as a question, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I genuinely think that the real financial disparity exists in the current setup, where the Dubs have this amazing training system for so long. They've got everything looked after for them, versus counties who are struggling to trundle along, struggling to turn the lights on in their centre of excellence, if they even have one, or struggling to pay the expenses of their players who are travelling down from Dublin to the country to make training, or to pay for their post-match meals. All those things get lessened the more games you have, and this is what this is promising. Plus the split season, you completely compress the training camps, which is the life of the inter-county football right now. You are in training camp for half of your year. Niall Carew is right. Cahir O'Kane is right when he says Division 1 will be a diet of creatine and steak for powerlifters, while the rest will try to catch up using pot noodles and treadmills. It's a great line, by the way. But the thing is, they are almost more right in the current scenario, and they will be less right in the new scenario. Something will be done to impact this a little bit. Granted, it's only a little bit, the disparity in the new system. I firmly believe that. But also, these conversations can happen while progressing with Proposal B. These are slightly separate conversations, and we can do both. We can tackle the financial disparity that exists and should be tackled, while also hoping for a better football championship for everyone. And that is the bottom line here. When you talk about Tony McEntee, and we had Mickey Quinn on the show last week, they seem to be of the belief that this will be good for them.